Hi, and welcome to Creepy Crime Story, where the darkest truths aren't imagined. They're real. It was a blistering early summer morning in Tempe, Arizona, June 15th, 2013. The kind of morning where the sun hasn't yet risen, but the desert heat already hums against concrete. On this day, in this heat, a 19-year-old woman named Adrienne Celeste Salinas disappeared without a trace. Her last known movements were ordinary. That's what made it so hard to explain. Adrienne had spent the evening of June 14th hosting a small birthday get-together at the apartment she shared with two roommates. The gathering wasn't extravagant. A few friends, some music, laughter, nothing that would raise alarms. But sometime after midnight, tension surfaced. Adrienne and her boyfriend, Francisco Arteaga, had an argument. The details of the dispute were never publicly disclosed, and those who witnessed it offered inconsistent accounts. What is clear is that Adrienne became upset enough to leave the apartment. Sometime around 3:45 a.m., she attempted to drive away in her Ford Focus. Less than a mile from her apartment, she clipped a curb and blew out two tires. The vehicle was found later, partially parked but clearly disabled. Adrienne made the decision to return home on foot, briefly to change clothes. She left again before 4:30 a.m., this time on foot. She called a cab using her cell phone. The plan, according to the taxi dispatcher's notes, was to meet the driver at the nearby AM/PM gas station on West University Drive. The driver arrived promptly at the designated location around 4:43 a.m. He waited. He called her phone. No response. After 10 minutes, he left. Adrienne was never seen again. At first glance, it was a disappearance without violence. No signs of struggle, no screaming, no forced entry, no forensic evidence at the apartment. Her roommates were asleep when she returned after the crash. None of them heard her leave again. Adrienne's purse and phone were missing, suggesting she had indeed intended to reach a destination, but she never did. When investigators began mapping out the case, the initial focus was narrow: the 3-block walk from Adrienne's apartment to the gas station, a short, familiar route through a quiet neighborhood. It was a walk she had likely taken dozens of times before, but the timeline was brutally tight. Less than an hour from the moment she made the call to the time her phone stopped responding to signals. The Tempe Police Department began canvassing the area. They searched garbage bins, alleyways, bushes, and rooftops. Door-to-door questioning followed, but no one had seen Adrienne. No one had heard a thing. A few surveillance cameras were installed along University Drive, but most were privately owned and either inactive or had overwritten the relevant footage by the time police requested it. The data left investigators uneasy, not because it told a complicated story, but because it told almost nothing. Adrienne's phone records, obtained via subpoena, revealed only routine calls and texts until the final hours. Her text to Francisco at 4:32 a.m. read, "I'm coming." What happened between that moment and her phone going dark has never been determined. Tempe detectives tracked cell tower pings to determine the phone's final location. The last signal came from a tower near the gas station, aligning with her plan to meet the taxi. There was no indication the phone had moved beyond that area. Yet her body, when found weeks later, would surface 30 miles away in an entirely different city. Back in the apartment, investigators found no blood, no hair, no fibers inconsistent with Adrienne's own. No evidence of someone entering or exiting without her roommates noticing. Her car was processed for prints and trace evidence. Again, nothing out of place. The keys were inside, the doors locked. The airbags hadn't deployed in the minor crash. Police dusted it thoroughly. All fingerprints found were Adrienne's. Tempe PD escalated the case to a critical missing person status within 48 hours, unusual for adult disappearances. This wasn't a teenager skipping out on responsibility. Adrienne had made Father's Day plans with her dad, plans she never missed. She was enrolled at Gateway Community College and planning to transfer to Arizona State University. She was not depressed, not suicidal, and she wasn't impulsive enough to vanish without notice. By June 17th, the FBI joined the investigation. Federal agents reviewed early interviews, cell records, and the limited digital footprint she left behind. They conducted broader environmental scans of Tempe, Chandler, and Apache Junction, towns that would become significant later, but in the immediate timeline, they found nothing. Forensic attention returned to the taxi call. Investigators confirmed the dispatcher received Adrian's request at 4:32 a.m., and the driver was assigned at 4:36 a.m. According to logs, he arrived at 4:43 a.m. and waited exactly 11 minutes. He attempted to call Adrian twice from his company phone. No answer. Cell data confirmed the calls, and her phone never received them. It had already gone offline. Was she taken before she reached the street? Was she intercepted en route? Or did she willingly enter a different vehicle? Those questions drove the tone of the next phase of the investigation, one filled with procedural rigor and almost no results. The problem wasn't chaos. The problem was clarity. The walk was short. The distance was familiar. The timing was precise. And yet, she vanished into open air. Detective R. Martinez, one of the lead officers assigned to the early case, would later reflect, "We've worked scenes with blood trails, with digital confessions, with suspects tripping over their own lies. But this was a blackout. She didn't fade. She was cut off, instantly, surgically. In those early days, there was no crime scene, no weapon, no suspect, just a missing girl, an unanswered phone, and a father dialing her number again and again, hoping irrationally that the call would go through." At 10:42 a.m. on Sunday, June 16th, Rick Salinas walked into the Tempe Police Department to file a missing person report for his daughter. He didn't bring a photograph. He didn't need to. Adrian was known, not just to her family, but to neighbors, classmates, her instructors. She wasn't a drifter. She wasn't impulsive. She followed through on plans, and she never ignored her father on Father's Day. Tempe PD processed the case under urgency. The responding officer noted Adrian had last been seen leaving her apartment on foot around 4:30 a.m. the previous morning. Initial intake reports confirmed there had been no known conflict at home, no substance abuse history, no previous disappearances. A file number was assigned. A preliminary search was initiated by the end of that day. The first step, establish her last known position. Detectives confirmed that a taxi driver had been dispatched to the AMPM on West University Drive at her request. He waited over 10 minutes before leaving the location, reporting that the rider, later confirmed to be Adrian, never appeared. GPS logs from his vehicle matched the time frame and location. His phone call attempts to reach her were verified. Both went unanswered. From a procedural standpoint, what followed in the next 24 hours would shape the trajectory of the investigation, not because of what was done, but because of what wasn't. Investigators reviewed the nearest known surveillance units in the area. The AMPM store's cameras were inactive at the time. They were set to overwrite footage every 48 hours and had already erased relevant timestamps. 2 additional privately owned cameras within a 2-block radius had limited angles and recorded nothing significant. No confirmed footage showed Adrian walking to the gas station. No passing vehicles captured her. No businesses nearby reported suspicious activity. For a city neighborhood with moderate foot traffic and several commercial properties, the absence of visual evidence raised immediate concern. Detectives then turned to environmental forensics. The walk from Adrian's apartment to the gas station was short, under half a mile. They canvassed alleyways, fences, dumpsters, storm drains, and construction sites along the path. Cadaver dogs were brought in by day 3. The results were negative. Adrian's apartment was rechecked. No signs of forced entry. Her roommates were again questioned. Each stated they had been asleep when she returned briefly after the vehicle incident and hadn't noticed her leave again. Their phone records, locations, and movements were consistent with their statements. Her room showed no struggle. She had taken her phone and small purse. Nothing else was missing. The Ford Focus she had crashed was towed and processed at the police impound. Damage to the wheels matched a curb strike. No airbag deployment. The ignition key was still in the center console. Prints lifted from the steering wheel, gear shift, and driver's door were all consistent with Adrienne's. There were no foreign prints. No trace DNA was found in the vehicle beyond her own. By Tuesday, June 18th, Adrienne's name and face were released to the media. A basic alert was issued statewide. Flyers were printed, volunteers gathered, but the lack of detail made calls for public assistance vague and ineffective. The timeline was fragmented. Her direction of travel was unknown. The area lacked camera coverage, and no new leads emerged. Her phone, the most critical piece of data, had powered off or been disabled by 4:53 a.m. on the morning of June 15th. Data retrieval efforts showed that her location pings stopped near the gas station. There were no outgoing messages, no calls after the taxi interaction, and no usage of apps or location-based services after that point. The phone never reconnected to any tower after that morning. That meant one of two things. Either it was intentionally powered down, or it had been destroyed or disabled. Detectives requested historical tower dump data for the surrounding area. That process was slow. It required court authorization and forensic coordination. The goal was to identify other devices active in the same zone at the same time. Devices that moved with Adrian's or mirrored its last location. The scope of those requests stretched over days. In the meantime, the investigation was at a standstill. The assumption early on was abduction. Voluntary disappearance was ruled out due to her social ties, academic progress, and financial status. There were no recent withdrawals from her bank account, no use of her social media or email, and no contact with family or friends. It was, investigators said plainly, as if she walked off the map. But something else stood out to detectives. Adrian's social circle, roommates, close friends, and her boyfriend, all aligned on the same core story. She was emotional. She was agitated after the argument. She was trying to reach Arteaga. But none of them could confirm seeing her after she changed and left for the second time. No one could verify her direction of travel, and no one claimed to have heard anything suspicious that morning. From a behavioral analysis perspective, Adrian's actions were coherent until they weren't. She experienced conflict, took a risk by walking alone, and followed through with an arranged ride. But the walk itself, that stretch of 3 blocks, was now the most scrutinized piece of real estate in Tempe. It offered no forensic residue. By June 20th, law enforcement brought in assistance from the FBI's Cellular Analysis Survey Team, CAST. The team reanalyzed tower data and suggested a broader sweep. Adrian's phone had last pinged from a tower near the Salt River bed, several miles southeast from the original assumed path. This expanded the possible area of disappearance significantly. The original map of her expected movement was now incorrect. She hadn't stayed on University Drive. She had diverted, but no one knew why. The update reframed the case. Either Adrian had willingly changed direction before meeting the cab, or someone had redirected her. The working theory shifted. By June 21st, the case was no longer considered missing person. It was classified as a suspicious disappearance with potential criminal factors. Local media picked up the language shift. The family was informed that foul play was now suspected. Detective F. Langston noted during an internal briefing, "We're not just behind. We're missing the hour that matters. If we can't reconstruct the missing 30 minutes, we can't reconstruct motive or method. Right now, we're chasing a digital void." At this point, the investigation was reactive. The delay in escalating the case beyond local parameters had cost them access to perishable data. Overwritten footage, unpreserved GPS logs from rideshare and delivery services, and weather-exposed environmental traces. Tempe is a university town. But like any American city, the infrastructure assumes crimes follow patterns. This didn't. Adrian's case lacked escalation, no reported screams, no witness trauma, no financial motive, no pattern of abuse. So where did she go? And who would benefit from her never being found? By June 22, 2013, the case of Adrian Salinas had officially crossed a line. It was no longer treated as a missing person report. It was being investigated as a probable abduction. The shift wasn't based on a single breakthrough. It came from accumulation. Time lost, evidence absent, and a pattern that, structurally, didn't fit the profiles of voluntary disappearance, mental health crisis, or spontaneous flight. The FBI took operational lead in coordination with Tempe PD. This was now classified as a high-risk case involving a vulnerable adult under suspicious circumstances. The case file reached Phoenix FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit the following morning. Their preliminary review focused not on motive, but on consistency. Adrian's behavior that night, agitated after a fight, leaving to find her boyfriend, calling a cab, making several attempts to reach someone, was consistent with an emotionally reactive decision, not premeditated flight. What was inconsistent was the near-total erasure of her movements between the last ping and the place where her phone went dark. Special Agent N. Driscoll from the BAU flagged this in his first report. Subject exhibits clear intention to reach a known destination. No signs of hesitation. Last digital behavior suggests urgency, not secrecy. This isn't someone trying to disappear. The shift in investigative tone also reframed Adrienne's social network. Agents re-examined interviews with her boyfriend Francisco Arteaga. He had told detectives they argued at the party. He admitted ignoring her messages afterward. What concerned the Bureau was not the content, it was the gaps. Francisco's timeline placed him at home the entire night. He had not seen Adrienne after the party. His phone confirmed no outgoing messages or location change after 2 a.m. But the FBI's CAST unit noted something unusual. Though Arteaga's device remained at his apartment, his Wi-Fi history showed a disconnection from the home router around 4:40 a.m., the same time Adrienne was expected to arrive at the AM/PM. Reconnection occurred 17 minutes later. This window, brief, unexplained, and technically consistent with someone leaving and returning, was not disclosed by Arteaga in his original statement. When questioned again, he stated he might have stepped outside for air. It wasn't enough to justify detainment, but it was enough to deepen scrutiny. Simultaneously, Adrienne's digital footprint was mapped retroactively. Her device last communicated with the cell tower closest to the Salt River drybed, 5.8 miles southeast of her apartment. The FBI now considered the possibility that Adrienne never intended to go to the AM/PM, or if she did, someone intercepted her before she got there. The apartment complex itself was reconsidered as a potential location of pre-crime contact. Agents canvassed tenants again, expanding from her direct neighbors to adjacent units. Most gave cooperative answers. One, a male tenant living 2 doors down, declined to speak in person, but provided a brief written response indicating he was out of town that weekend. Agents requested records. He had been working in Flagstaff. His alibi checked. Forensic examiners requested access to Adrienne's laptop, which had been left in her room. Browser history showed routine college activity, including job applications and a scholarship search 2 days before her disappearance. No emails indicated travel plans, threats, or coded messages. She hadn't researched routes or cover stories. All indicators suggested permanence, not departure. The challenge, as noted by the lead profiler, was absence. This case lacks escalation. There's no precursor event, no buildup. She's present, then she's erased. That doesn't point to crisis. That points to control. Agents reviewed the possibility of opportunistic crime. Stranger abduction cases were statistically rare in Tempe, but not impossible. FBI records showed 2 similar age-range disappearances in Maricopa County over the previous 5 years. Both were resolved. Both involved known perpetrators. The team then turned to known offenders in the area. One name surfaced repeatedly: Brian Patrick Miller. Known locally for his zombie hunter persona at comic conventions, Miller had a history of violent ideation and was later convicted of multiple homicides. At the time of Adrienne's disappearance, he was not a suspect in any active case. Public databases showed Miller was active on internet forums around that time. His vehicle, matching a light-colored SUV, was registered in East Phoenix. No record placed him in Tempe that week. Still, investigators made note. His proximity, history, and victim profile alignment warranted ongoing background vetting. At the same time, the investigation expanded to include transient movements. If Adrienne had been taken by car, where would the logical routes be? Police scanned traffic cameras from University Drive to Apache Junction. Most recordings had expired. One still frame captured a vehicle similar to Adrienne's, but it wasn't hers. Another angle caught a blurred figure near the gas station on June 15th at 4:47 a.m. The quality was too poor for facial ID. The figure was never conclusively identified. Frustration grew. Despite hours of video review, lab tests, and digital traces, the investigative unit lacked physical proof that Adrienne had even left her apartment complex. In a procedural sense, the trail began and ended at a location that didn't yield evidence of any kind. Detective Langston summarized it in a joint operations memo. We've got a person who vanishes in an urban setting, in full proximity of digital infrastructure, and not one clean data point after 4:53 a.m. That isn't luck. That's intentional concealment, or an event that disrupted every standard trace. Meanwhile, the family's presence remained consistent. Rick Salinas appeared on local news, pleading for information. Community members circulated flyers. Local businesses put up posters. Tips came in sporadically. Most were unhelpful. Some were cruel. A few prompted follow-ups, but nothing held. The case reached a plateau. FBI oversight remained in place. CAST analysts continued modeling potential routes based on phone tower data. Behavioral analysts updated their profile to focus not on impulsive violence, but calculated interruption. Someone, somewhere, had taken a narrow opportunity window and executed it with a level of precision rare in crimes of passion. Adrienne Salinas didn't run. She didn't fall off the grid. The evidence wasn't lost. It had never existed in the first place. Some cases shift when someone speaks. Others shift when someone is found. On August 6, 2013, 52 days after Adrienne Salinas vanished, a worker performing routine maintenance in Apache Junction noticed a foul odor coming from a wash near the desert edge. This area, part of a dry creek system prone to flash flooding, sat over 30 miles southeast of Adrienne's last known location in Tempe. It wasn't near her school. It wasn't along her route to see her boyfriend. There was no reason for her to be there, and yet she was. Maricopa County deputies arrived at the scene by midday. The body had already undergone advanced decomposition. It was found partially buried in silt, tangled in debris from prior rain runoff. Detectives secured the area, noting the absence of clothing, personal items, or any direct identifiers. No purse, no phone, just skeletal elements, deteriorated soft tissue, and insects consistent with weeks of environmental exposure in high summer heat. An expedited forensic team from the county medical examiner's office recovered the remains. Dental records provided the match. Adrienne Celeste Salinas was declared deceased the following day. The official confirmation was withheld from the public for 72 hours, while next of kin were notified and an initial autopsy was performed. Cause of death, undetermined. The report cited extensive decomposition, environmental artifacting, and inconclusive trauma evidence. No bones were clearly broken. No definitive ligature marks were visible. There was no usable DNA under fingernails. Soft tissue had liquefied under Arizona heat. No blood remained to test. And without traceable foreign material, no carpet fibers, vehicle residue, or unique soil particles, there was no forensic link back to a suspect or location. This discovery did two things. First, it confirmed what investigators had already begun to suspect. Adrienne hadn't run away. Second, it erased what little hope remained that she had simply gotten lost or injured. Someone had either transported her body after death or had taken her there alive and ensured she never left. The location itself complicated the investigation. Apache Junction sits beyond Tempe's eastern jurisdiction, tucked into the edge of the Superstition mountain range. Sparse camera coverage, no foot traffic, poor cell reception, and no active construction or delivery activity during the time of disappearance. Whoever left her there knew the area, or intentionally chose it for its isolation. Investigators mapped possible routes from Tempe to the dump site. 4 primary roadways, no tolls, no entry cameras. Any vehicle could have made the trip undetected. The distance ruled out pedestrian transport. Adrienne didn't drive there. She was placed. Tempe PD and the FBI returned to digital records. Cell tower metadata was reanalyzed to include extended pings from devices active along the path between Tempe and Apache Junction in the early morning hours of June 15th. While hundreds of devices crossed those zones, few remained active long enough to suggest a stop or delay. None corresponded to Adrienne's contacts. No known associates of hers had devices matching the movement profile. And her own phone was last pinged at the edge of Tempe, never near the recovery site. Environmental forensics from the scene yielded little. The wash bed had flooded once in late June, compromising potential trace evidence. Insect activity suggested the body had been there for multiple weeks, But weather variances limited the ability to date the deposition precisely. No tire tracks were recovered, no drag marks, no shoe impressions. In short, they had a victim, but still no scene, no timeline extension, no suspect, and no clear method. The lack of trauma didn't exclude homicide. It just made it harder to classify. Manual smothering, strangulation without fracture, sudden asphyxiation without deep bruising, all remain possible, but without intact tissue or corroborating injury, none could be confirmed. Detectives revisited prior interview subjects. No one had new information. Adrian's boyfriend remained cooperative. His alibi for the night remained plausible, if incomplete. His vehicle was re-inspected. No trace evidence linked it to the recovery zone. The FBI couldn't justify a warrant for personal electronics beyond what had already been collected. With no probable cause and no new leads, the investigation settled into what law enforcement calls quiet phase protocol, ongoing but not active. For the Salinas family, there was no such thing as quiet. They now faced a confirmed loss with no clarity, no closure, and no one held responsible. They buried Adrian with a closed casket. No memorials, no suspect photo to post. Just a reminder that some cases don't end with answers. They end with a location. In the years that followed, the Apache Junction site remained part of the core briefing for new detectives entering the case. Not because it explained anything, but because it was all that remained. Forensic investigators documented the exact GPS coordinates. They resurveyed the topography. They tested for calcium leaching in nearby soil. They compared fly activity to seasonal reports. It was methodical, it was thorough, but none of it brought the case closer to an arrest. What stayed consistent was the pattern. Adrian disappears in a short, traceable window. Her last digital activity is clean. Her path vanishes without friction. And when she's found, it's not because of technology or detection, it's because of a smell. This reality reflects a wider truth in American missing persons investigations, particularly those involving young adults. Not all absences leave trails, and not every crime scene includes the crime. Some investigations lose momentum because there's too little to chase. Others lose it because they're chasing too many things at once. After Adrian Salinas' body was recovered, the case entered a phase that most detectives dread, when attention shifts from finding the missing to explaining the dead, and the questions multiply faster than the facts. With a confirmed death and no cause determined, investigators revisited every name that had surfaced in the original file. But the approach was different now. This wasn't about who had seen her last. It was about who had the motive, means, and opportunity to ensure she was never seen again. Francisco Arteaga, Adrienne's on and off boyfriend, remained a focal point, not because there was direct evidence against him, but because his proximity to her last known intent was undeniable. Adrienne had argued with him the night she disappeared. Her final texts were aimed at him. She had arranged a ride to his place, and yet he claimed he never saw her. He had a partial alibi. Cell records placed him at home, and no digital movement suggested he left. But investigators noted the earlier anomaly. His home Wi-Fi disconnected briefly around the same time Adrian's phone last pinged. Arteaga attributed it to a power issue. There was no follow-up connection to Adrian's device, no calls made, no text received after hers. When questioned again, his answers were consistent but guarded. Legally, there wasn't enough to hold him. Investigatively, there was reason to keep him close. Detectives expanded their scope. They reviewed Adrian's academic history, employment records, and any incident reports from her past 6 months in Tempe. Nothing surfaced. No known stalkers, no harassment complaints, no suspicious coworkers. Her social media profiles were clean. No encrypted messages, no anonymous threats, no changes in behavior. It was as if whoever targeted her knew to stay entirely outside the digital footprint. That led to another possibility, a stranger with a pattern. In late 2013, investigators revisited the files of several unsolved attacks and missing persons in Maricopa County. The name Brian Patrick Miller, then known locally for dressing up as a zombie hunter at conventions, was flagged. He had a sealed juvenile record from a stabbing case and had previously been questioned in the murders of 2 young women in Phoenix. But at that time, Miller had no active warrants and no physical evidence connected him to Adrian. His vehicle, a light-colored SUV, was noted to match a blurry shape seen on one degraded traffic cam frame near a Tempe intersection around 5 a.m. on June 15th. That footage was too low resolution to confirm make, model, or plate. There was no facial capture, no passenger view, and the camera's angle cut off before any identifiable landmark. Miller's presence in the area remained unverified. His DNA was not available for comparison, and Adrian's remains offered nothing viable to test. It was a dead end for now. At this stage, the FBI restructured the suspect matrix. They introduced behavioral criteria, familiarity with Tempe, ability to transport a body undetected, and knowledge of Apache Junction's remote terrain. Profiles were mapped, but no subject emerged with a full match. None with clean motives, none with clean access. It was during this gridlock that public speculation surged. Online threads suggested everything from serial killer theories to cover-ups. Media segments focused heavily on the case's gaps: missing phone, no eyewitnesses, a clean autopsy, a boyfriend under scrutiny but never charged. Some headlines insinuated more than the evidence supported. The family, especially Adrian's father, asked that focus return to facts, not theories. Behind the scenes, agents pursued leads quietly. Vehicle logs from scrapyards were checked for recently junked cars, matching any potential abduction profile. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit compared Adrian's disappearance to national cases with similar windows and outcomes. Patterns didn't align clearly with any known series. Meanwhile, community frustration grew. There was a body but no arrest, a name but no accountability, a date of death but no cause. For the public, it seemed frozen. For investigators, it was gridlocked in the worst way, not for lack of effort, but for lack of error by whoever was responsible. What complicated this further was the absence of escalation. Most crimes of this nature follow one of two paths: a sudden emotional break or a methodical pattern. Adrian's case showed neither. No known mental health issues from any person of interest. No consistent history of violence. No pattern to build around. And so, detectives continued circling the same axis. A young woman disappears in a narrow window with zero digital trace past 5 a.m. No usable surveillance and no suspect rising above the noise. There were people of interest, but there was no one the evidence pointed to. In the rare instances when homicide cases stall this long, it's often not because the killer outsmarts law enforcement. It's because they leave nothing behind, not even themselves. That's the hardest thing to prove, that someone existed in the space where everything vanished. Adrian Salinas' phone was never found, not with her body, not at the crash site, not anywhere. Records showed her final activity was a 4:32 a.m. text. By 4:53 a.m., the phone was offline. Not out of battery, off the grid, no failed pings, no reactivation, no GPS, no iCloud backups, no cloud sync. A hard stop. The FBI's CAS team ran tower dumps. One detail stood out: several unregistered phones active in the area at that exact time. No subscriber info, no prior activity. Burners. One of them went dark right after Adrian's. This wasn't random. It suggested someone knew how to remove a phone and knew what that would prevent. No DNA, no location tracking, no timestamps. Whoever took her didn't just act fast. They understood what her phone meant. There was no signal. And that was the signal. This pointed to planning. It shifted the investigation from who had motive to who had technical control. Adrienne didn't just vanish. She was cut off. The lack of evidence was no longer a gap. It was the signature. When the media stops calling and tips stop coming, investigators enter a phase few talk about: maintenance mode. Adrian Salinas' case reached that point by the end of 2013. It was no longer about chasing leads. It became about documenting dead ends. The public wanted movement. They had followed the timeline, watched the family's pleas, and seen a body recovered. But what they didn't see, what they weren't shown, was the backlog of open cases stretching across departments and states. Adrian's case had no clear suspect, no strong forensic trail, and no new digital evidence since June 15th. Behind the scenes, investigators kept reviewing. Cell tower data was reanalyzed quarterly. A DNA profile request from the limited tissue samples was submitted to Cody's, but no matches ever returned. Her laptop was rescanned with updated software. Still nothing. There were moments when attention briefly returned. A cold case arrest in a neighboring county. A new forensic tool launched. An updated behavioral profile requested by the FBI. But each time the result was the same. Adrian's case didn't match. Her murder didn't align with known patterns. Her disappearance was too clean, her phone was too silent, and no one was talking. Internally, the case was still active, but personnel changed. Detectives were reassigned. Prior leads were archived. The forensic lab that handled her evidence now processed dozens of newer, higher priority cases. Nothing about Adrian's file was discarded, but no department could justify pouring more hours into a case with no fresh angle. Her family never accepted that. Her father stayed visible. He contacted media outlets for anniversary coverage. He called in on public forums. He urged the department to test newer DNA tools, to cross-reference vehicle ownership in rural counties, to re-interview neighbors who might have changed their stories. He didn't accuse. He insisted that Adrian mattered, that what happened still had weight. Some cases collapse under a lack of evidence, others under a lack of attention. Adriana's risked both. The most painful part wasn't the silence. It was the fact that nothing about the case ever changed. Her phone stayed missing. The body revealed no new detail. Her last text remained unchallenged. And the one person she was trying to reach still offered nothing investigators could use. For law enforcement, this wasn't failure. It was function. Cases like this don't usually get solved with breakthroughs. They're solved when someone talks years later, or when a DNA hit surfaces unexpectedly, or when a confession finally comes, not because of guilt, but because circumstances force it. But to the community, the story just ended. No trial, no resolution, no footage, no motive, no forensic headline. Just a 19-year-old girl who walked out of her apartment and never came back. Some crimes are violent, some are chaotic. Adrian's wasn't either. It was careful, and it stayed quiet. Adrian Salinas' case remains open, not by choice but by consequence. More than a decade has passed, no charges, no arrests, no new evidence. The case file sits active but quiet, flagged for review if new technology or testimony emerges. In Tempe PD's system, it's classified as unresolved. In her father's life, it's anything but. Rick Salinas still marks June 15th every year. He keeps a copy of the missing persons flyer, not as a reminder of what was lost, but as proof that someone, somewhere, still knows what happened. Over the years, he's worked with advocacy groups, pushed for better data retention policies, and asked the state to improve interagency surveillance sharing. The FBI continues to assess cold cases with modern tools: genealogical DNA tracing, forensic facial reconstruction, AI pattern recognition across multiple jurisdictions. But in Adrian's case, there's no usable DNA, no viable surveillance image, no confirmed suspect behavior to anchor analysis. Technology keeps evolving. The problem is the evidence hasn't. Her name has appeared in documentaries, podcasts, and investigative specials. Each time, the facts are repeated, the timeline reconstructed, the same questions asked. But no episode has brought forward the voice the case needs, the one person who was there when Adrian vanished. Some crimes are solved by science, others by chance. The rest, like this one, remain suspended, waiting for someone to step forward, a tip, a detail, a moment of honesty that pulls a case from cold to closed. What Adrian's case teaches us isn't just about criminal procedure. It's about how silence is sustained, not only by the person who committed the act, but by the systems that couldn't stop it and the witnesses who never spoke. Justice in cases like this isn't dramatic. It's delayed, buried under files, forgotten in case queues, until someone insists it matters again. Adriana Salinas was 19. She left behind no headline motive, no enemies, no final call, just a father still asking for answers, and a city that once searched, then moved on. But some people don't get to move on. In some cases, shouldn't be allowed to. Sometimes the hardest truth to accept is the one without answers. But if Adrian's story teaches us anything, it's that silence can be a signal, and we must never stop listening. As someone who's walked through the aftermath of uncertainty, I've learned that justice isn't just about catching someone. It's about remembering someone, about not letting their story end in a file cabinet. If you've ever lost someone without closure, you know how heavy that absence becomes. So what about you? Do you believe some cases are meant to be solved? Or do you think some truths will always stay buried? Let me know what you think in the comments and where you're watching from. And if this story moved you or even made you think, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. Justice starts with paying attention. Let's keep paying attention together.